Start. Yeah. Okay, right. Good evening. So let's try and share some ideas this evening on both Tezaveh and Purim, and how we can learn what I think is a vital and fascinating message about the Megillah, about Purim and in general, from the main theme in this week's Parsha. So the Parsha obviously is in two halves. Parshas Tezaveh begins with the description of the obviously with the menorah, the oil. But after that, it goes on to the description of in great detail of the begodim of the Kohen Gadol, and then also of the Kohen Hedjed as well. And there's a huge amount of focus in all the Mefarshim on understanding what exactly these begodim were for, what they symbolized. It's quite clear they had an incredibly deep symbolic significance. But as we've often done, I think it's very, very important to take a broad lens approach to try and understand what was it they were trying to achieve when looking at them all in general. We can go into all the specific details of every point about the specific begodim, these specific garments that they had to make, but let's try and understand what the focus was. And here we have a very, very fascinating pasuk, and I'll tell you why it's fascinating in a moment. Perek Chof Ches, pasuk beis. It actually appears twice in the parsha. It appears once in the context of the Kohen Gadol and once later on with the Kohen Hedjed. And the pasuk says like this: you shall make holy garments for Aaron, Achicha, your brother, for honor and for splendor. Seemingly straightforward, innocuous. This is what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be honorable. They're supposed to be for Seferis, for splendor. But Ramosha Shapira points out, it's actually in Hanukkah, when he's talking about Hanukkah, he says that this is the only place in the Torah where the Torah commands something which involves making something beautiful, specifically using that word to make something which is tiferes, which is beautiful. And that should alert us to the fact there is something very unique going on here in terms of what these begodim, these garments, are meant to achieve. Now, the simple explanation and the basic pshat in these words, for honor and for glory, for splendor, we find in the Ramban, we find in Rabbeinu Bachai. The Ramban says that effectively, he says, means that the Kohen Gadol should be honored and he should be, if you like, he should be glorified with these garments. And he actually proves that we find these particular garments are the essence of royalty. It was long known that there's a specific, he talks about the me'il, he talks about the robe, he talks about how to this day, he says even in his time, kings and distinguished lords, they use these particular garments. He brings other proofs as well. He says that tzitz is like a golden crown. So that's the simple, straightforward pshat in what these words lechoved sefaris means. The Ramban also, though, gives a different pshat, which is deeper, which he calls al derech ha'emes, according to the mystical way of the Kabbalah. And in this way, he does make a distinction between kavod and tiferes, between honor, glory, and splendor. Now, that's the approach we're going to take this evening, is basically to develop that theme and to try and understand what the specific reference to Tiferes is. The connection specifically to Purim is that if you look through the Megillah, you will notice that the notion of garments of begodim stands out. It again and again and again, they are emphasized. The whole idea of your view levush malchus. He was told that Mordechai is told the instruction is given that the one of the king wants to honor shall be on the horse with this levush malchus, this royal garment. Right? We find vatilbash Esther malchus. Right? Esther clothes herself in royalty. You have the whole idea of when the great psukim of Simcha. Right? You ever asked yourself how much of that description focuses on what he's wearing? You know, there are many other things that could be used to describe the way and the simcha of that occasion. With his crown, right? Everything is about Everything is about the garments. And then, of course, we have the minhag itself of partsufim, the minhag of dressing up, of masking ourselves. Think that some people think this is a recent thing. It's in the Ramah. It's clearly a very established minhag, the idea of dressing up. Where does that come from? What is the idea? Why is it so significant? Why is this such a constant theme in the Megillah? Let's go right back to basics. Let's understand the essence of what clothing is meant to represent. Rav Hirsch tells us in Bereshis, the first time we find the description of what clothing in detail is in Bereshis. Vayas Hashem Elokim la'Adam le'ishtoi kosnos ar ve'al bishem. Hashem made Adam and his wife garments of ar, literally of skins, different explanations of what that means, and clothed them by al bishem. Rav Hirsch says that you see from here that there is the essence of clothing itself is that it is a reminder, it is a message. Mankind only needs clothing as such, as we know, once he is expelled from the Garden of Eden, from Gan Eden. When outside, that is when the clothes take on that significance. The garment reminds the person the whole time that they have not yet returned to the pristine state in which they were created. That's why, says Rav Hirsch, Reb Meir called those garments kosnos are with an aleph, garments of light. Others, there's a Yalkut Shimoni which says that Hashem made for Adam and Chava bigdei kahuna, she'aseh laKadosh Baruch Hu bigdei kahuna, where you have that link with the Kohanim. This deep and essential idea that garments are meant to transmit a message is found right at the beginning of the Torah in Bereshis. So, in the Mefarshim, we begin to see the difference between Kavod and Tiferes. There is a Sforno. The Sforno says, you can have a look if you want to see it inside. If you've got across from Toras, you can see that the Sforno says like this. The Sforno is on Perek Chov Ches Posuk Beis, yes, on this Posuk. And the Sforno says, L'kovod means L'kovod okel yisparach b'yosam bigdei kodesh la'avodaso. Kovod means for the honor of Hashem, as they were garments of kodesh, of holiness la'avodaso, for his service. Ula Tiferes, what does Tiferes mean? Sheyeh kohen moira noira al kol svivov. He says that the idea of Tiferes is that the Kohen, as his responsibility as a teacher of Klal Yisrael, he should be revered by all those around him. That's what the Tiferes means. Sheim talmidov hachakukim al liboy kseifov. They are his, literally means his students. It means the Shvatim, the tribes that were engraved, the Shvatim that were engraved upon the Choshen and upon the shoulders as well. So therefore, you see from the Sforno that there is the distinction, if you begin to make a distinction between Kavod and Tiferes, is that Kavod is effectively for the glory of Hashem. Tiferes is understood, the splendor is understood as entailing some form of responsibility for the role and the position of the Kohen himself, the Kohen Gadol. It's like the Kavod, the garments represent, they show honor to Hashem, that's the Kavod. Tiferes means that there's a responsibility for the person themselves, the person wearing these garments, to remind themselves and recall what that responsibility is. To understand this, though, we need to go a little bit further into the deeper meaning behind that word Tiferes and what Tiferes itself represents. Says Rav Moshe Shapiro, when he develops this idea of Tiferes, he says like this. He says that Tiferes has a very specific meaning: splendor, beauty. The root, of course, it comes from the word pe'er. Pe'er means beauty. And he says that, what does beauty mean? What does it mean? What does it mean when something is beautiful? You find a number of references. We find a number of references in the Torah to the idea and the concept of Yofi and the concept of beauty. There's a very well-known Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Mem Tes Omid Beis. The Gemara says that there were 10 portions of beauty, of Yofi, that descended to the world. Yerushalayim took 9 of them, and the rest of the world took 1. So Yerushalayim is described, Mitzion Miklal Yofi. Yerushalayim is described as the most beautiful place in the world. It's got this exquisite beauty about it. What is the beauty of Yerushalayim? Says Rav Moshe Shapiro, Yerushalayim habnuya ke'ir shechubra lo yachtov. Yerushalayim is a city of connection. It's the place that is the one place in the world where the Shomayim are connected to the Oretz, right? Yerushalayim Shalmata is opposite Yerushalayim Shalmala. The two are connected together. It is the place of connection. The problem is that by the very, even saying that seems impossible. There is an essential, massive contradiction between connecting anything in this world to anything in Shomayim. Yet, somehow, Yerushalayim manages to achieve that harmony. Says Ramosha Shapiro, Tiferes, Pe'er, beauty, is harmony between two contrasts. That is the most important thing you need to know about Tiferes. The greater the difference between those two things, okay, and the fact that even so there is a harmony created between those two elements, the greater the beauty, the more beautiful the thing is. That is what Tiferes is. That is why, going back to the Yerushalayim example, Yerushalayim is the most beautiful place in the world because it manages to find a harmony between two complete opposites to two complete contrasts, the Shomayim and the Oretz. Manages to find that unity between them. That creates Tiferes, that creates splendor. But even in our own experience, we know that the greatest, the most beautiful sounds are the ones where there is a harmony produced between different sounds, right? The most beautiful pieces of music, where you take different instruments that are very different in nature, yet you bring a harmony between them. That harmony is Tiferes. That's what it is. That is pair, that is beauty. You take a beautiful view, okay? So the most beautiful views are views of contrast, right? If you imagine yourself standing at the top of the Grand Canyon, maybe some people have even had the privilege to do so, you're standing there, the contrast is the heights and the lows, is the mountains and the valleys. When you see a view that has contrast within it, that creates the beauty within that view. That is the vista. So both in views and in terms of sound as well, harmony between contrasts create beauty itself. Now, let's think about the key role of the Kohanim is. What is the role of the Kohanim? What is their duty? The role of the Kohen is to connect, right, the higher and lower worlds. That is the name Kohen. Maharal says that in the root of the word Kohen, you have the word ko, like so, right? The idea of being similar, creating similarity. Ko means it should be like this. This should be like this. How does the Kohen do that? The Kohen is the one tasked with being the facilitator, if you like, by creating a connection between the higher and lower worlds. That is how it is. The Maharal finds a very powerful representation of this as well in the name of the Kohen, in the word Kohen itself. Kohen is the gematria of Kohen is 75. Okay, 75. 75 is between 7 and 8, right? 7 is always this world, the 7 days of the week, right? The material, right? The physical world. What is 8? 8 always represents L'malam and Ateva. We know Chanukah, Bris Milah, etc. We're familiar with that. 8 is always above, right? The Kohen in the gematria is 75 because they are in between. They are the ones tasked with creating that link somehow. So between the higher and the lower worlds. And that is why the Kohanim have to wear the begodim which are defined as Tiferes, garments which are defined as splendor, as beauty. Because and this is where he refers us to the second half of this Ramban, where the Ramban says this idea of al derech ha'emes. The Ramban, having gone through the simple explanation of what these words mean, the Ramban says that Tiferes, he brings a pasuk in Tehillim, ki Tiferes uzomoi ota. You are the splendor of their strength. The Tiferes of the, according to the Ramban, is that there should be, they need to achieve through wearing these garments an overpowering of two things that seem to be in complete contrast. In this case, that linking between Shemayim and Eretz, their responsibility, their responsibility that they have in terms of bringing korbanos, in terms of linking the whole of Bnei Yisrael with Shemayim itself. When Moshe Rabbeinu says Moshe Rabbeinu quotes from when Moshe Rabbeinu says to Paro, he says, "Hispoer olai." He challenges. Yeah, he says, "Challenge me to fix a time when I should daven for you." The idea is that he's saying, overpower me. Hispoer olai. You intend to overpower me. You intend, the same word, hispoer as the root pair. You intend to make me stumble. You intend to make me do something. I can't do this. This is unachievable. How can you possibly fix a time that that I'll be able to daven to Hashem to remove these makkos, to remove the plagues? Yet, that is exactly what he is able. That is exactly what he is able to do. The Kohanim's role is to overcome and overpower that contrast. And through doing so, they are able to create true tiferes, true beauty in this world, because it is the harmony that they create through their actions that itself creates the beauty and the idea of tiferes. It's their own hard work. Now, Rav Dessler tells us that actually this idea is intrinsic to who the Kohanim are, the very nature of the Kohanim. So we know that Aaron HaKohen is the epitome of chesed, right? Aaron HaKohen is the one who runs to bring people closer together. He is the one who is always involved in chesed. We say tumecha v'recha leish chasidecha. Yeah, the Urim v'Tumim, which are in the Choshen Mishpat, right? They are in the Choshen, which is used effectively for judgment. It is the idea of that. That's where they would consult and be able to find out the way forward. We know from Tanakh. The Kohanim are by nature people involved in chesed, yet they are called upon in every respect to act with din, with judgment. Everything about the avodah is what we would call midas hadin, the strict judgment. You know, it has to be done in such an incredibly precise way. The second half of the parsha describes what they would need to do for the miluim, the inauguration korbanos, in great specific detail. Even a wrong thought can make the whole thing go off course. As anyone who's learnt dafim and zvachim about pigel will know, right? The whole thing can be messed up with a wrong machshava, with a wrong intent. So this itself means that the Kohanim themselves have to somehow, even though by nature they are people who have that midas hachesed, that essential nature of kindness, of being able to be flexible, if you like, they have to marry that somehow with the din and with the essential roles and requirements of the avodah itself. But being able to create that harmony, that creates the tiferes, that creates the beauty. And you find the same thing with the idea that the bigdei kahuna, right, the garments of the Kohanim, they contain shatnez. They contain shatnez. Again, what is the idea that they contain shatnez? So it's explained that the difference between wool and linen is wool is soft. Linen is considered, apparently, if you look at it, I think under a microscope, it's very specific lines. It's got very different qualities to wool. The wool is soft, the wool is chesed, and the linen is din, it's harsh. Bringing them together produces tiferes. That is why in the garments of the bigdei kahuna, the garments of the Kohanim specifically do contain shatnez itself, exceptionally. But the point is it doesn't come naturally. I mentioned before the sforno. The sforno seems to imply that whereas kovod, honor is for Hashem, is in the sense that it brings honor to Hashem, tiferes takes effort, it takes work. And the Malbim brings this out very beautifully. The Malbim says that the difference between kovod and tiferes is that the word he talks about the fact that kovod refers to the neshama as well, or the nefesh. L'mani zamercha kovod, my honor, my soul, my nefesh will sing to you. A person is honored through one's own, he says, inherent, if you like, spiritual core, who we are as people. We have that inherent ruchnius, that spirituality within us. But the level of tiferes, the level of splendor, he says, can only be achieved through a person's own efforts. He develops this in his Perush on Yeshayahu, Perek Dalet, Posuk Beis, where it talks there about L'gon and Tiferes. He says like this, he says, I'll bring you a simple proof that you can only achieve Tiferes through your own efforts, your own hard work. He says that the B doesn't have any, there's no effective tiferes, there's no splendor in something which it does naturally. It naturally needs to produce honey. He says the spider webs, the amazing spider webs that a spider can create, that doesn't produce splendor because it's natural. It's something which comes to them by nature. Says the Malbim, Cain so too, lo yispar ha'adam, b'toya v'yofi ozikna. Person doesn't, the title of tiferes, the title of splendor doesn't attach it to a person because of their appearance, what they look like, or because of perhaps they've achieved an advanced age. That's not what splendor is. That's not what tiferes is. And that's why he says, we say, we are mechabed the elderly, yichabdu es hazakenim, but we are yefaer es hachachomim. There is tiferes attached to chachomim, people who have worked on themselves in the sense of achieving wisdom. That's what tiferes is. Tiferes is what comes through hard work and hard efforts. That's how the Malbim understands it. So, for example, that pasuk we brought earlier in Tehillim, which the Ramban brings on this week's Parsha, Ki Tiferes Uzomai Ata, which means basically you're the strength, or you are the splendor of their strength. And that means that their strength is from Hashem. Strength is something which is nature. Either you're strong or not. We have a natural strength. It's part of one's nature. But when it comes from Hashem, it is possible to be inspired over it, because it's something which you're taking something which is natural strength, you're working on it, you're developing it, working on it in a spiritual sense. I think that's how we can understand it in that sense as well. So effectively, what we've said is as follows. The Chaim are given these garments. We explained that Rav Hirsch says in Bereshis that garments themselves are meant to carry a message. You see that from the very first time when Adam and Chava first wear garments. There's a message for them. There's a message to remind themselves, you've left Gan Eden. You need to remember how to get back there. What's the message of the garments for the Kohanim? That they are lekovod uletiferes. Yes, they are lekovod, they are honorable, but they're also tiferes. They remind you that you have a responsibility and a role to bring together two contrasting elements, to be able to bring korbanos on behalf of the whole of the Jewish people, to be able to link together the seemingly impossible two realms, the realms of this world and the realm of Shamayim, just as Yerushalayim itself does, which is why Yerushalayim is described as the most beautiful place in the world, because it manages to overpower that contradiction, which, as we said, creates tiferes. That is what the Kohanim need to do. And that is why they wear begodim that are tiferes. And with this, we can understand perhaps the role, the central role, and if you like, the mystery of garments in the Megillah, and indeed the message of dressing up on Purim itself. Because Purim, what we're meant to achieve on Purim, we call the avodah of Purim, it requires, by definition, achieving a level of tiferes, achieving a level of harmony between contrasts. What is the tiferes of Purim? The tiferes, real harmony of Purim, is achieving that harmony between what we see going on outside, right? The external teva, right? The external nature, the natural world as represented by garments, begodim themselves that cover things, and what is really going on the inside, the pnimi, what is really happening beneath the surface, the fact that Hashem ultimately is in control. Only at the end, with hindsight, can the Jewish people see how they have undergone this entire incredible story. Only at the end can they see Hashem's hand going through the whole process, how the internal matches up with the external. Only then can they see some form of tiferes, some form of harmony. And that is why, this was my chavrusa, Rav Tzvi Malmstein suggested this beautiful idea that there's this particular emphasis on Techeles Mordechai. Yeah, you notice that When Mordechai goes Yotzel Lefnei HaMelech, right? But Avush Malchus, what's this Techeles Mordechai? We say again, Shoshanas Yaakov, we say again, Techeles Mordechai. Why? Because again, Techeles in the begodim, the garments of the Kohen Gadol, right, and the Kohen was specifically made up of shatnez. It was that contradiction in terms. That's what it was. Shatnez is a complete contradiction. In other contexts, it's forbidden to wear shatnez, right? To wear that woolen linen. Only the Kohanim do. They have to. The Torah tells us, right? Torah tells us that's what they had to do. Mordechai is wearing a levush of techeles, which represents that, not that he was wearing shatnez. It wasn't a big day kahuna he was wearing, but he is wearing a garment of techeles, of that particular material, which tells us and teaches us this particular this idea. So you see, that represents, that techeles Mordechai represents how the difficulties come together, the harmony and contrast, the tiferes, the splendor that we can discern if we work hard enough at it in the incredibly complicated world that we live in. Effectively, in the Purim story, what happens is that the garments of mystery, the confusion, become the garments of majesty, right? That's what happens. That mystery, the mystique behind it, becomes the garments of Tiferes. Through the idea of Tiferes, we now understand how everything fits into Hashem's plan. There's a beautiful story Rabbi Reuben of Manchester tells of in 1961, he and a group of friends, Chassidish Bochrim, they went on a tour of the Shtiblach in New York City. And they'd done something in those days which was completely revolutionary, was they'd hired a whole lot of animal costumes, full-length animal costumes. Nowadays it's much more common, right? At least in a normal Purim, right? So they were going around, and one was dressed as a lion, one was dressed as a bear, one was dressed as a gorilla. You can imagine, right? And they're going around to all these shtiblach, all these Chassidish shtiblach, and they're wearing these different animal clothes, and they're having a lot of fun. They do their spiel. They're raising quite a bit of money. And wherever they went, they brought a huge amount of simcha to people inside the shtiblach. They came to the base medrash of the Boyana Rebbe, Zichron Levrocha, in the Lower East Side, which at that time was the thriving center of New York, of America, even itself. They stumble in, and the Boyana Rebbe is sitting there at this tish, and he seems taken aback to see all these animals. You can imagine somebody walk in and start performing in front of him. And one of his gaboim turns around to the Boyana Rebbe and says to him, "They zenen mention, they're humans. Yeah, it's okay, they're humans, right?" So the Rebbe says in Yiddish, yeah, he says like this. He says, "I want to see if you're really a Yid. I want to see who you are." So he's take off the gorilla head, he said. And then he says, "I'll give you $10 for your stock." And everyone's very happy, because in those days, $10, they said, was a serious amount of money. They were very happy to receive $10. They do anything. So he manages to take off this gorilla head. He takes off the gorilla head. He puts it on the side. And the Rebbe smiles at them and says, he says, "You see, right? On Purim, afilu the chayas zenen mention." On Purim, even the wild animals are people. Yeah. So the idea is this beautiful little story, is that on Purim, what we can all achieve, even if it's only for a brief few moments, is that glimpse behind the mask, that sense of Big Day Kodesh lekovod ulatiferes, the idea that the message of the begodim of the Kohen Gadol and the Kohanim in general, that there is a harmony in this world. There is a harmony. That's what their garments represent. Their mission was to somehow bring that harmony between this world and the world above us. A very difficult task. But on Purim, when we emphasize and we put on those dressing up clothes, and we emphasize the fact that Mordechai went out with Tcheles Mordechai, and there is this refrain of Levush Malchus, the garments of the king. On Purim, we can somehow gain a glimpse into the beauty that's created by a harmony of contrasts. And when we do that, we can perhaps come just that bit closer to that incredibly powerful and beautiful line in Eishes Chayil, Oiz v'hodar levusha. That strength and splendor is her garment, v'tischak liyom acharon, and therefore she can laugh even at the end of days, even right at the end. There's a possibility on Purim just to see over that wall a tiny bit, just to catch a glimpse of the harmony that exists in this world, how the hidden life that we lead, where we are, what we live, all the confusions, the complexities, the difficulties are actually all part of Hashem's master plan. They are part of a harmony of contrasts between the inner meaning and what we see on the externals, on the outside. Thank you all very much for joining, and for hopefully, well, let's have a Freilich on Purim as best we can, which I'm sure we will in the circumstances. And yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you all for joining.
Go to.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi Birnbaum.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Birnbaum.
Okay, Carlton. Have a good evening.